Bravo is our first keynote speaker for the afternoon. He serves as the Executive Director of the Just Transition Alliance. Jose is a longtime leader on just transition, climate justice, and chemicals issues as they relate to environmental justice, communities and labor, organized and unorganized. Born in Mexico and brought to the U.S. as a child, Jose's work in social justice issues is rooted in his upbringing in the Southern California avocado fields, alongside both his parents. Since the 1990s, Jose has gained recognition as a national and international leader in the EJ, or Environmental Justice Movement, or Economic Justice, in the EJ movement. Jose has worked on numerous campaigns in the U.S. and in Mexico in his 30 years of organizing. Please join me in welcoming Jose Bravo.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I bring you greetings from one of the states in the lower 48, California. That's where I live. And as you heard, I was actually born in Mexico to farm worker parents and brought to the United States as a child by them. But I want to tell you that I've been very, very lucky in the work that I do. I was lucky enough to be part of the first People of Color Summit, which was where the environmental justice movement really was established in the United States. I was also part of the drafting of the principles for environmental justice at that first People of Color Summit, and I noticed that there's maybe a couple folks here, Dune being one of those that was at the first People of Color Summit. And back in those days, Dune and I had less gray hair. We were in our 20s. I'm going to talk to you about the history of just transition. So we've heard a lot about just transition, what it is, what it could be, and what it should be. But I want to talk a little bit about how it came to be that workers literally came together with environmental justice communities throughout the United States. In 1997, we had already formed several networks across the country. One was the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice. Another one was the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the Southern Organizing Committee, the Farm Worker Justice Network, the African American or the Northeast Network. And in 1997, the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, which was all about 90,000 workers, and you might say, wow, that's pretty big. But when it comes to unions, they were probably one of the smallest. Invited us to Chicago to have a conversation about this just transition. And there was a thinker by the name of Tony Mazzocchi that was part of the OCAW, the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, who had been thinking about this just transition. And the reason that the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union thought about this just transition was very interesting to us, the way that it was laid out. Basically, the workers, which were primarily white males in the room at that meeting, were talking to us about that their union workers made everything from a BB gun, BB, or a BB gun, to a nuclear weapon. And 90,000 chemicals on top of that. And petroleum-based energetics and energizers in the sense of fuels, rocket fuel, they make jet fuel, they make kerosene, they made everything that we know as fossil fuel derived fuels. And their issue was that even they saw that some of the things that they produced probably shouldn't be on the face of the planet. And as workers, they said, we need to transition out of this type of production into something that makes more sense for workers, communities, and the planet. So, moving forward, we had a discussion about unions. And by the way, the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union was, and that sector of industrial unions are the highest paid union members in the United States. You can go into a refinery and start with a base salary of about $100,000 and move up from there. So you have people, literally 20-year-olds, coming into refineries with salaries of $100,000. I mention that because that's what complicates sometimes this conversation around a just transition, right? So they said, we tried coming together first with Greenpeace and several other mainstream groups, and we just didn't see eye to eye. But we heard about this environmental justice movement out there, and we figured that since we're inside these plants, and you all represent communities at the fence line, we're in this together. Because a chain link fence is not going to protect you from what happens to us inside those plants. So we are and could be natural allies. So moving that discussion forward, they started talking about, the only thing that we're asking of the environmental justice movement per se is that you not picket at our job sites. And we said, okay, if that's what you're asking of us, then we ask you not to strike as workers. And they came back to us and said, wait. Striking is one of the main tenets of organized labor. So we said, actually, us picketing and doing direct action outside some of the plants that are putting hazards into our community and contaminating our communities and causing all these health effects is also a main tenet in our movement. So we developed this agreement called the Mutual Cooperation Agreement. And basically what it said was that we agreed that if we were going to have a picket or some kind of direct action at a plant that was represented by the OCAW, then the OCAW members, we would talk to the brothers and sisters in the union and actually invite them. And they should invite us. They should invite us, the movement, to any kind of strikes or pickets or other things like that. Because we were in this together, right, from that point on. So that's how we started to formalize things. The other thing that came up at that meeting, which was really interesting, was the fact that they considered this whole sector of labor, of workers, not unionized labor, of workers, which they called contract workers, as scabs, as folks that could potentially take their jobs, other things like that. And we had to have a deeper discussion about that. Why? Because the contract workers were actually people that looked like me, that had brown or black skin, that actually did the work that white male union workers refused to do because it was either unsafe or it was just not within their work description. So we said, don't knock folks from our communities, because what happens is there are these things called, they're agencies, they're labor agencies, temporary agencies, temporary work agencies that hire these folks to go in and again, do the work that you refuse to do. And we said, instead of knocking them, you should unionize them. You should build your rank and file with folks that are also needing to be protected just like you. So moving that forward, we decided to put 5 sites together in the United States. San Antonio, Texas, around the Kelly Air Force Base site, which was a Kelly Air Force base, had contaminated the drinking water of the community with jet fuel and other chemicals that they use for war, Agent Orange and other things that were stored there for many, many years. The other one was Ponca City, Oklahoma, with the Ponca tribe around the carbon black plant. Most people don't understand that when rubber comes out, when rubber is pulled from trees, it's white. So your tires in this essentially would be white if it wasn't for carbon black plant that takes this really fine black powder and mixes it with the rubber to make tires black. So where does that fine powder come from? Yes, you guessed it, refineries. It's part of the byproduct of refineries. And that was being mixed in Ponca City, Oklahoma. It was causing respiratory problems. It was causing many, many other illnesses and contaminating the water. So folks in Ponca City, Oklahoma, we came together with the tribe and the workers from the carbon black plant, which was, by the way, the workers were in a lockout situation. That means that they were picketing outside and the company had already hired other folks to come in and take their jobs. The other site that we worked in was Rillito, Arizona, with Arizona Portland Cement. Why is cement like dirty? Well, cement many times uses toxic chemical from landfills. Instead of these chemicals going to landfills, so these toxic chemicals can be, after they're used, they can be rediverted and go into cement kilns to burn. And that's really, really dangerous and bad. And at the same time, it's an environmental nightmare. The workers there were striking, and the community there. We're talking about Rillito, Arizona, that probably has about 50 households, right outside one of the biggest plants in Arizona. And the majority of the community in Arizona was black and Latino or Latina. So definitely there was an issue there around environmental justice, and race, again, played a major role in where Arizona and Portland Cement was sited. Then Richmond, California. In Richmond, it was really interesting. We just came in kind of on a peripheral because there was already work being done there. But it was to support the work around a chemical security or a policy at the supervisory level to safeguard workers and communities through a chemical security legislation. And in our work that we were doing, we realized a couple of things. One was the easiest way to work together wasn't on the issues that were at hand, such as the lockout or the strikes or the picketing for collective bargaining and or the contamination. You know what it was? It was the health inside the work facility and the health in the community. So what we did is we asked a person by the name of Marvin Legator from the University of Houston, Dr. Marvin Legator, to come up with a survey, a health survey for us. And he came up with a doozy of a survey with about 380 questions. And it was supposed to be on all the health, parts of health. And ultimately what we ended up doing is we ended up paying community members to do the survey of workers and workers to do the survey of community members. Why? Even though some of these folks had gone to high school together, they hadn't talked since high school. But they knew each other. And a lot of people, by the way, think that in some of these chemical plants and some of these refineries, the people that actually work there are from the community. Not necessarily. In many instances, probably the majority of the instances, workers come from other communities to work there, and they leave that community at the end of their shift. But in Rillito, Arizona, they actually did go to high school to play basketball and football together. So we got them to reacquaint themselves and start working together on hazardous air pollutants, on using, the potential of using toxic chemicals to burn in the kilns of the cement company, of this thing called the shaker. They used to bring up trains right up to the community, and they have this thing, so you probably are shaking your head, and basically they take a train car and they shake it until all the coal or whatever is in it comes out, and it was driving people's houses off their foundations, right? So people were saying, okay, we see some of the issues now. So then the workers would take some of the tractors from the plant and start cleaning up some of the debris in the community, other things like that. So again, it was building community. Then we started to also move on the issue of finding out more about how we could come together. On the second year, when I was hired as a national organizer, on the second year, probably 1999, I was sent to the oil school in Denver. And as an EJ, a person coming up through the EJ ranks, for me to go to the oil school in Denver was an eye-opening experience, because it literally was where workers are sent to learn everything about oil, everything about production. And one of the first tasks that I had as in that school, there was about 10 of us, was to take apart what happened with the Exxon Valdez here in Alaska. Many people, when I was commenting last night over dinner, had heard that, the ship run aground in Alaska, that the Captain Hazelwood, was drunk at the time, and that the ship ran aground and leaked all his oil. First of all, that's what Exxon wanted you to hear? Because when we did a systems safety analysis on it, we found at least 27 different failures. That ship needed to be double-hulled. It was never double-hulled. The shipping lane that it was originally on was closed for traffic by the Coast Guard. So they changed shipping lanes. The icebergs and other things that were in the way, the devices to retract ships from them, they were all turned off by the Coast Guard for retrofitting. The radar was being retrofitted. The communications was being retrofitted. All these failures happened. Literally, on that, it was literally the perfect storm. And what did people hear? That it was a drunk captain. So that's what happens a lot of times with workers inside this industry. that the industry blames it on somebody else other than themselves, right? And so we started learning a bunch of things. We started learning that all oil that is taken out of the ground basically goes into a distribution grid throughout the United States. And if Exxon pulls 1 barrel of oil here in Alaska, they can recover that barrel in Houston, as long as they put 1 barrel of oil in Alaska. If BP pulls out another barrel of oil somewhere else, they can recover it in New Jersey. So it's all pulled together, and whatever they put into it is what they can get out. So a lot of those things we never understood. We didn't understand why pipelines, right? Why pipelines? Why such a big deal about pipelines? Well, that's how their grid is made. That's how their grid is built. And that's why they needed pipelines at all costs. And literally at all costs. So, let's further the discussion to now. So, when we talk to rank and file workers in the oil chemical industry, and we say, what's your sense of urgency? Do you think they answer that the sense of urgency is the end of fossil fuels? Anybody think that? No. Their sense of urgency is actually automation. That their jobs are going to go away to automation. That's what they're fearing the most. And it's important to understand that when we have a conversation with workers around, because we've been talking to workers, I know Gopal and others have been talking to folks around peak oil, when there was a production that was at the peak, and now it's on retrograde. And a lot of us had this conversation around what it would take to just transition out of fossil fuels. And back when we were having that conversation, this isn't too long ago, by the way, it was probably within $400 billion to move away from fossil fuels altogether. And it was never done, right? How much money did they spend in Iraq and Afghanistan? To do what? They spent more than that in Iraq and Afghanistan to secure more oil. It wasn't about peace and freedom. It wasn't about democracy. It was about securing oil. So, again, I think the willingness of the country has shown different. So the big question is also, how do we transition a worker that earns $150,000 a year into a new economy? How do we do that? It's a difficult question. And how is a just transition paid for? Right? You hear all this talk about Green New Deal and Build Back Better and all this other stuff that's going on. But ultimately, how do you pay for that? Our idea is that you take all the subsidies that you give the petrochemical industry, right? And you start redirecting those subsidies in the right way. That's corporate welfare that's been paid since probably the Industrial Revolution, somewhere or another, right? So we need to redirect those resources to where they should go, and that's to building resilient communities and worker-owned cooperatives and businesses that give back to the community instead of taking away from the community. So the language around just transition, it's amazing. We've been taking workers now to the UN processes, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, for several years, and this last year we took a large delegation of workers to the UNFCCC. And I remember back in Paris was where we actually listened for the first time that the word just transition made the preamble of the Paris Agreement. But do you know what kind of a just transition that was? And what they were thinking about is what we're getting now. They think that us moving from what we have now to nuclear energy is a just transition. It's not. It puts us in more harm's way. And when we sit with this administration and we hear that same discussion around hydrogen, around nuclear energy, I invite them to go and visit our brothers and sisters in the Navajo Reservation, where that damage hasn't been repaired from the history and the life of production of nuclear energy. The World Bank talks about funding just transitions. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, is talking about just transition. And what is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development talking about would be a just transition? How about net zero? That's again, smoke and mirrors. That's not gonna get us to where we need to be. That recently we talked with folks from the administration and folks from labor about carbon capture and some of these other things, and I said, look, basically, if you can tell us that carbon capture is not going to prolong the life of fossil fuels, we'll sit down at the table and listen to that. But you can't guarantee that. There's no way you can guarantee that, because that's the shift that the industry wants in order for them to have about another 100-year extension in life of producing fossil fuels. So let's not believe everything we hear, but let's understand that most of the solutions are going to come from our communities, not from those multi-billion-dollar corporations. They're coming from our community and the folks that work in those plants. So I want to thank you all for listening to my conversation here. And I invite you all to visit us at shameless plug time, www.jtalliance.org. Thank you.